Seriously, what is going on with the Army service uniforms? Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and over the years I've pushed out a couple of videos talking about the changes that the Army is making with its service uniforms. And to be honest, the responses that people have had have been varied. You see, back in the late 2000s, the Army took steps to reduce the number of service uniforms from 3 down to 1. But recently, the Army has reversed course in order to increase the number of service uniforms. That has caused a predictable amount of confusion. On one hand, you have the graybeards who kind of see this as just a return to the way things have always been. But younger soldiers can feel surprised that the Army would try to increase the complexity of its uniforms. To get started, it should be obvious now that the Army is most of the way through the process of introducing the new Army Green Service Uniform. The AGSU is a throwback to that iconic uniform that was worn by U.S. soldiers during World War II. And it's intended to be the everyday service uniform for all soldiers. To avoid confusion, and trust me, there is plenty of opportunity for this, let's take a look at the table of contents of DAPAM 670-1. This is going to help us understand the uniforms and their official names. I have 3 uniforms listed here: the Army Service Uniform, the Army Green Service Uniform, and the Blue Mess Uniform. And there are 3 big things to notice here. First, see how there are 2 service uniforms, but only one of them has nomenclature that distinguishes it by its color, the AGSU. Second, note that the word blue is only used in conjunction with the Blue Mess Uniform. I would love to just leave the Blue Mess Uniform out of this conversation completely. But when people start talking about the blue uniform, there's a tendency to cause confusion with the Blue Mess Uniform. Just to be clear, there is nothing about the AGSU implementation that is going to have any impact on the Blue Mess Uniform. And the third thing that I want you to notice is that both the ASU and the AGSU have what are called dress variations. A dress variation just means that the service uniform is worn with a bow tie and no headgear. You see, sometimes you'll hear people talking about the AGSU becoming the service uniform and the ASU becoming the dress uniform. That's not exactly true. I mean, the ASU is going to be kept around and it's going to be used for more formal events, but not necessarily in its dress variation. Although I will admit that for some folks, the only times that they'll find themselves wearing the ASU is in the dress configuration. The funny thing is, and almost an unavoidable point of confusion, is that the defining feature of the ASU is that blue coat and for most ranks, blue trousers. So there is a strong temptation to call the Army service uniform something like the Army Blue Service Uniform. I mean, there's an Army Green Service Uniform, so why wouldn't there be an Army Blue Service Uniform? And you want to know something funny? The 2020 AGSU implementing guidance includes the instruction that effective October 1st, 2027, the ASU will be known as the Army Blue Uniform, the ABU. I'm not sure why they wanted to wait so long to make that name change, but for the purposes of clarity, as we go forward in this video, when I'm talking about the ASU, I'm going to call it that future name, the Army Blue Uniform. Now, are the pinks and greens replacing the Army Blue Uniform? Well, yes, in terms of their role. Before the introduction of the AGSU, the Army blue uniform was used for both everyday wear and formal events. And so you'd wear it to do office work or to attend, I don't know, something like a funeral. The AGSU, the pinks and greens, they are replacing the Army blue uniform, but only in terms of being that uniform for everyday wear. It doesn't fully replace the Army blue uniform for formal events. So the Army blue uniform, what we would call today the Army service uniform, is not going away. But you can't be blamed for thinking that it was. You see, in 2020, when the AGSU implementing guidance was published, the Army's G1 said that the ASU wear-out date was 30th of September 2027. It certainly sounds like it's going away, but that's just a clumsy piece of bureaucratic text. What they meant was that they are renaming the Army service uniform as the Army blue uniform. In fact, if you go to military clothing and sales today, you'll find that they are still selling both uniforms. Of course, the AGSU is front and center. You almost trip over them when you walk in the door. But the Army blue uniform is available, at least at Fort Myer. They just have the ABU stuck back in a corner. Now, I've had some people say that the Army blue uniform is no longer for sale, and I doubt that, although I wouldn't be surprised if it's kind of tucked away and hidden. But I did notice something very interesting when I checked out what is for sale. The condition of these blue jackets seems, well, it seems poor. And the manufacture dates are old. I mean, I found lots of jackets from 2014 and even several from 2007. I'm not sure exactly what this implies, but I kind of get the impression that when the Army leadership told the manufacturers that they were going to roll out this new, cool AGSU, that the manufacturers were like, but we have warehouses full of the blue uniform. And I'm further suspicious that the Army brass was like, oh, I know what we'll do. We'll keep the blue uniform so you can continue to sell your existing stock. And I will tell you that there is an amusing amount of historical revision as far as why the Army needs a new uniform in the first place. You see, if you look at the AGSU implementing guidance, they say that the Army blue uniform is overly formal for daily wear and was never intended as our daily service uniform. And that's funny, because when the Army blue uniform was rolled out, those same offices said that the blue ASU is intended to give soldiers what they asked for in a service uniform, and that the Army will phase out the green and white service uniforms and retain the blue service uniform. I mean, it seems to me that the original intent was that the Army blue uniform would be used for everyday wear. What's more, the 2020 changes were justified by saying that the guidance is a culmination of soldiers' efforts and feedback provided throughout the Army. And that is even though the Army blue uniform was apparently the product of input from hundreds of thousands of soldiers and leaders from all Army components over a 2-year period. I mean, somebody's changing their mind an awful lot here, and you gotta ask, is it really the soldiers, or is it just the brass? So, I am not convinced by any stretch of the imagination that the saga of the Army service uniforms is over. I mean, it's even in the Army song. The Army keeps rolling along. Changes are just a constant part of this experience, and if you want to see how the lives of soldiers have been impacted by these changes, then watch this video.